Alright everyone, it appears that another escalation is in the works over the Ukraine war. Russia's 12th Division, which manages nuclear materials, by the way, has been moving. They've got a train convoy headed towards Ukraine right now. This has been recorded by several people. Link in the description, archived of course. This is not great, just to be clear. This ticks the timer half a second closer to midnight, although I think we're already like a second till midnight or something, so it's very incremental at this point. We're close to the eve of destruction, a lot of people think. I would like to offer a cool heads prevail analysis of this. Again, arguing devil's advocate maybe as far as Russia's intent. Of course, the hope is that there will be no nukes being fired. I don't think that any Russian or Ukrainian really supports the idea. I can't imagine the average Russian wants to glass Ukrainians either. I know a lot of people have Russia derangement syndrome, so they think everyone in Russia is like uber tanky, a total vatnik, and you know, they want the glory of the Kremlin to spread across the world and imperialism and stuff. While you may get that rhetoric from the upper brass and like the post-Soviet class of the oligarchs in their society, typically that's not what you get on the ground from individuals. Even like in the United States, people think that Americans are all like gung-ho for imperialism. Yeah, go kill them off in the deserts. Ha ha, dead terrorists, dead children. That's not really the way that it works. Although I do see a worrying trend of liberals in the United States abandoning the love beads and meditation in favor of saying, well, guns here are bad, but we should really be shipping more of them to the war front, even though we're not directly allied with Ukraine. Sounds like a great idea. Let's escalate things further. I don't see the average person making that argument. Regardless of what they think of the invasion of Ukraine, of course, I condemn it. That doesn't mean I believe in Kissinger-style brinksmanship. And that could really be what we're working with here. The fact that nuclear-capable launchers are moved into an area, number one, does not necessitate that they're actually going to launch. Number two, does not necessitate that they have nuclear warheads in them. Moving that kind of material is rather expensive and time-consuming and logistically difficult. There's always the possibility that the train gets derailed and then you've got a bunch of atomic weapons rolling around freely in the hills. Go free, my atom bombs. Go lay there in the field with the sheep and then they'll glow in the dark. I'm sure that will fetch a much higher price. Well, everyone wins, I suppose. Glow-in-the-dark wool. Hipsters will want nuclear wool at any point in the future. I'm sure it'll become a fashion statement, just like uranium glaze for plates and things like that back in the 1950s. Hey kids, get your Geiger counter kit. It comes with a free chunk of uranium ore. True story, they used to sell stuff like that. I'm pretty sure that those toys must be regulated at this point. Anyway, it doesn't necessitate that these are actual nukes. You can take the same missile, minus the warhead, and park it somewhere. It could also be an attempt to try to get the Ukrainians to attack one of these systems. Oh my god, they're moving, tactical nukes into the region. Clearly the Kremlin is amping up to start World War III. We have to take preemptive action. If we can take these nukes off the battlefield, we'll show the world we're not afraid to do the Brinksmanship thing. And then they attack him, and then Putin comes out on TV and says, those weren't nukes. What the fuck are you talking about? By the way, you just bombed something that's 10 feet in Russian territory, so, we're going to annihilate you now with thermal barracks. I can't imagine, again, based on the logistics of the situation, Russia is hurting. They've had to partially mobilize. Their equipment is running low in certain aspects. Even through the fog of war, we have a tacit admission by the Russians themselves that their mobilization process was botched a bit, kind of lacked coordination. It's quite clear that Russia's having problems, but they have much more manpower. They have a much stronger military capability overall, even if Ukraine's being pumped with Western weapons, and they largely control the areas that they want to annex, although they are being pushed back in the Donbass and elsewhere. Despite that, Russia has many non-nuclear options to go with. They have thermobaric weapons. They have the father of all bombs. They have manpower superiority. They've already got a chunk of Ukraine. Ukrainians don't control anything in Russia because, nobody's suicidal enough to storm the border. Why would Russia use tactical nuclear weapons under such a circumstance? If anything, they're more likely to park a couple of nukes there as a warning. Hey, if things go bad and you do manage to push us back to our border, you'd better make sure there are no border skirmishes, because then that's going to be a fucking problem. It could also be just Kissinger-style brinksmanship. This having the madman strategy. We did this in the Cold War. The United States under Nixon, in alliance with Henry Kissinger, got the idea that we should fly nuclear bombers just to within a hair's breadth of the Russian and Chinese borders on numerous occasions. Russia, by the way, adopting the same very successful strategy. They do the same thing now. Generally, before that, there had been a holding pattern that was further out from Russian airspace. So you've got the B-52 bombers with the nuclear payloads, Dr. Strangelove style, and they buzz around and run sorties so that at any given point there are a dozen aircraft in the air. You give the code, you give the order, and their targets get demolished within an hour or so. Slight oversimplification, but that's the basic premise. Later on, we got the idea, no, we're actually going to just constantly fly the sorties closer and closer to their airspace. We're going to get just within a couple of nautical miles of violating their water, their territorial waters, and we're going to keep them on a constant war footing because, number one, it'll scare the shit out of them. They'll think we're nuts. That makes diplomacy maybe a little bit easier. It worked, by the way. The madman strategy was ultimately successful. Think what you will about the concept of looming nuclear annihilation. It did work at the time. I think that Putin may move nuclear-capable systems, whether or not they have warheads actually in them and or are capable of firing, into the region, in order to antagonize the West at a time when Europe is hurting due to the energy crisis. Hack, H-A-K, that's a brand here. We have some carrots from them that I got just the other day. I was going to make a cottage pie, but plans fell through. Very sad because it's one of my favorite meals, and I put a lot of fenugreek in it. Trust me, you want my cottage pie sometime. I'll put a recipe out or some shit at some point. Maybe it'll be glowing in the dark soon. I'll be all ghoulified, so I won't even need to drink clean water or anything anymore. And I'll just call everyone that I encounter a smooth skin and then chuckle to myself because none of them will get the joke. I have a feeling that it's just an attempt to keep the West on a war footing. They're sort of doing what the United States did to the Soviet Union, which is that consistent antagonism, a constant need to be on that war footing, eventually ground down aspects of their economy. The Soviets went insane in the 1980s and just started mass-producing huge nuclear weapons stockpiles. They've destroyed many of them now, but at peak, I think it was, 10 times more weapons than currently exist, or some insane number. It's enough to destroy everything in the world. They could have nuked every city on Earth that had more than 100,000 people in it and still had some left over, so it would have been quite literally the destruction of the world if things had popped off at the time. They appear to be deploying a similar strategy. Keep in mind, Ukraine's not a member of NATO. It's not a direct military ally with any of the nations that are funding them or giving them weapons. There are some states that have been reluctant to give them tanks and shit. While they're doing a good job, and they're fighting on their own turf, and they have pushed the Russians back in several areas recently, overall in the preponderance, Russia wouldn't have a reason to nuke Kiev, for example. It would draw universal condemnation. Even the Chinese, in my opinion, at the end, would rebuke them. They wouldn't take further action, but even the Chinese, I think, at the end of the day would tell Russia, okay, this is too much. It's time for diplomacy. Your piggy bank here in Beijing says we're going to bring you to heel. Enough is enough. I know that you want all of that warm water portage in the south coast of Ukraine. You've already got Crimea. You're making an embarrassment out of yourself. Fucking shut up. You've got to understand that Beijing really is the master in that particular dynamic because they control the purse strings. China is like the House of Representatives. Russia is like the military arm, as we see at the moment. I don't know that these pads are actually nuclear capable at all, to be clear. We don't know if there are warheads in these. The confusion, the not knowing is probably the point. That is the whole point. It's a Sun Tzu tactic. Your enemy doesn't know what the fuck is going on. They get nervous and maybe they make a mistake. That's probably what the Russians are aiming for. At least that's what we can hope. Of course, I could wake up tomorrow and find that there are a couple of mushroom clouds in Eastern Europe. That'd be a little bit of a problem depending on the way the wind happens to be blowing. But anyway, when I was a little kid, nuclear testing was still going on, so I got my vitamin U from uranium already when I was a little kid. That's about all. Peace out.